Today I'm going to talk about what I've always felt is one of the biggest scams when it comes to graphics cards, and that is the OC models, or the crazy overbuilt models. So what I did today is I actually took, okay, I was going to say our MSRP 5070 Ti Prime, because it was an MSRP card when we got it, which was supposed to be $749, but that was a short-lived deal. It's now $829, but then we slapped the Asus TUF 5070 Ti BIOS on the Prime to see what kind of performance uplift we may get, and if it's even worth considering buying the cards that have crazy amounts of uplift and cost. To what end? Does it give you more performance? Probably not. Spoiler alert, not really, but we'll talk about it today. We'll show you just exactly what the behavior difference was with one BIOS versus the other. And don't forget, that is a $999 BIOS we slapped on the $749 MSRP 5070 Ti Prime for $829. You can't make this shit up. Enhance your professional monitor setup with the Viewsonic VP27885K, featuring 100% sRGB, 99% DCI P3 colors, and HDR400 for deep contrast that align perfectly with Mac's industry-leading color performance. The VP27885K supports laptops, PCs, Macs, and more with Thunderbolt 4, USB-C, HDMI DisplayPort, and USB inputs. If you're looking to increase your screen real estate for projects, click the link in the description for more. So the format's gonna be a little bit different here. I'm gonna show you guys the results first, and then I'll kind of walk you through how to do it if you want. It's basically the same exact process I showed you when we put the crazy like XOC BIOS on a different brand card, how you could force that to happen. Well, you can do the same thing within the same brand. So for instance, instead of putting like an Asus BIOS on a Gigabyte card or a Gigabyte BIOS on an Asus card, you can put a higher tier Asus BIOS on a lower tier Asus card, or a higher tier MSI BIOS on a lower tier MSI card. You can do that. And for the most part, you'll get the benefits of the additional clock speed and the power limit changes and stuff that are available to those cards at the lower tiered cards. Now, let's go ahead and talk about why somebody might want a card that has a quote unquote beefier built design. I have been saying this as long as I've been in YouTube. I do not feel the custom variant cards are worth it over the lower end cards. Unless you're at like the top. And what I mean by the top is this, like back when I first started talking about this, the 780, get an MSRP 780 card, right? The Founders Edition, which wasn't even Founders at the time, it was like the reference design. But let's fast forward now to like the 5090, right? The Astral card versus something like even this Aorus card right here, they're not built the same. And what I mean by that is this card has, I believe there's 60 amp phases in them for power phases, and they like the Astral card and the Galax card as well. I believe the Galax Lab OC card, the Hall of Fame card, have like 80 amp power phases, which on the to a regular person putting it on their system doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean anything. You are not overclocking your system for the most part to anything, to any degree that would matter, where one system has 20 amp higher phases than another version. Unless you're doing like the crap we've been doing around here with the XOC stuff and the LN2 and pushing a 600 watt card to over 1200 watts. So with that said, then those phases and stuff might matter. But for most people, and by most I mean like 99.999999999% of buyers, that doesn't matter. Like the Astral card is $3,349. That is $1,349 more expensive than the Founders Edition at MSRP. That is absolutely insane to think about what that premium costs. Because if you go back to like the 700 series cards or the 980 Ti, the custom cards were like maybe $75 to $100 more expensive on average than the OC cards than the regular cards. And then you might have gotten something crazy like the Matrix or the Poseidon and stuff like that, which then cost a lot of extra money because it had built-in water blocks and crazy stuff. But we're talking now price premiums on cards that could be as much as an entire system. The premium of the price of the card is as much as a lot of people's entire system. That's not the price of the card. That's the premium on top of the MSRP price of the card. That is the craziness that we are in today. So like I said, what I did, the longest intro ever into a video, is I took the 5070 Ti Prime, it's the only 5070 Ti I have, which was an MSRP card at the time, which is now $829, which is what, $70 above MSRP, $80 above MSRP. And I threw the $999 5070 Ti TUF BIOS onto it to compare what would happen. Now on the base specs are all the same. It's got the same memory, it's got the same memory speed, it's got the same core count, into CUDA core, ROPS, all that stuff is the same because it's the same architecture. But what's different is the clock speeds, and that is about the only difference you will ever find in the BIOS between these cards is clock speed. Now, the base clock on the 5070 Ti is 2295 megahertz. Without accounting for GPU boost, pushing it farther, the card's boost clock is 2452 megahertz for the Prime non-OC. However, the TUF has a boost clock of 2588 megahertz. So we're talking 136 megahertz higher just from one card to the other. Now, manufacturers would tell you, yeah, but we have a beefier design and we have more power phases and we're using solid capacitors and all these things that are supposed to be able to help support the higher clock speeds. But realistically, those are also just components designed to drive the cost up. It really is. Like, this card doesn't even have RGB or any of that stuff. And now apparently the MSRP cards that cost $750 minimum don't deserve RGB because they're the base models. Anyway, that ridiculousness aside, let's go ahead and talk about the results and then I'll walk you guys through how to do it if you want. So first things first, I use Steel Nomad to do our testing here for power draw and frequencies and the actual FPS that we're getting. I'll show you the FPS at the end because it's actually kind of crazy. But so if we take a look at our chart right now of the stock Prime BIOS versus the TUF Prime BIOS, and I did overclock both of these as well. Here's the chart right here for the stock BIOSes versus each other. Now you can see, interestingly enough, the blue line here is the stock BIOS for the Prime versus the pink line, which is the TUF BIOS. The TUF had a higher starting clock. Now the reason for that is I had in the control panel, it's set to prefer maximum performance, which means it's not gonna like idle down. It's not gonna go to its lowest C states, or P states, which will allow it to basically idle at like 250 megahertz. It was actually staying at its boost clock, if you will. So those boost clocks, as we talked about, are not even represented here accurately because both of those cards go higher than their represented boost clocks of 2200 and whatever megahertz that it was. But as you can see right here, as soon as they go under a load, they go right to the same numbers pretty much. I mean, there's a difference of like 8 megahertz between these two. In fact, the stock BIOS average frequency under load was 2862 megahertz. Now you might notice that is quite a bit above the 2452 megahertz that's mentioned in TechPowerUp GPU-Z's behavior for the card. That is because GPU boost takes over. That says if there's more power and there's available to it, it hasn't hit a power limit, it hasn't hit a temperature limit, let's push the frequency until we hit either a voltage limit, a power limit, or a temperature limit. Now there is an upper limit to that. The BIOS will only let it go so far because otherwise it would push itself till it crashes, right? So it has to find an upper limit. Guess what? For the 5070 Ti, which is more of a core limit at this point, that limit's about the same on both of these cards. In fact, 8 megahertz is not even a full boost bin difference. This is just an average, right? So you can see the charts, they do kind of cross over each other, but the average difference is 2862 on the stock versus the stock TUF BIOS of 2870. So like I said, 8 megahertz difference. No performance difference whatsoever when it comes to like tangible, noticeable change in your games. Now, once we overclock it, which is where I wanted to see what one of the major differences was going to be here, do we have more overclocking availability to us? You can see right here represented by the yellow line, that is the stock BIOS for the Prime with a plus 400 core offset in MSI Afterburner and a plus 2000 megahertz offset for the memory. Now it's also important to note in these charts, as it mentions up there, the GPU fan is locked at 100%. So we want to keep the temperature as controlled as possible so we can see actual behavior differences between the BIOS. We have the voltage slider maxed out and we, max power, max fan, max voltage. So as you can see right here by the yellow line, we were able to go plus 400 core, plus 2000 memory. But on the TUF BIOS OC, I was able to do a plus 500 with a plus 2000 mem. Now here's what's crazy about this is if we go ahead and take a look at our power comparison, or power draw, this is the actual total board power being drawn. The blue line, as you can see, is pulling over 340 watts, hitting nearly 350 watts under load at certain parts of Steel Nomad. The Prime BIOS, which is the stock BIOS, just the regular Prime BIOS, is actually drawing about 20 to 25 watts less on average. You can see the line is the exact same shape as Steel Nomad, because as the scenes change, so does the difficulty of rendering that scene. But it follows the exact same line, only it's about 20 to 25 watts less power demanding, which is kind of crazy to me. Now, what about when we overclock them? Well, if you take a look at the bright yellow line right here, you can see with the plus 400 curve, we definitely exceeded 350 watts. However, it's got a pretty hard limit. It will max out the power limit. So it spikes about 355 watts, and that's as high as it's allowed to go. So then it will throttle down a little bit on the frequency to keep the power draw from going above where that slider maxes out. But look at the orange line, basically drawn right through the middle of both the stock numbers and a lot flatter. That's the tough BIOS with the 500 core offset and the 2000 memory offset, pulling pretty much a steady 330 watts just about across the entire thing. So what we were able to achieve was 100 megahertz more overclock on top of the already 130 megahertz or 138 megahertz, whatever it was, kind of like boost clock difference between them. Because remember, this frequency that we're doing on the offset is gonna be added to the boost clock that the GPU has in its firmware. So the VBIOS is gonna say, hey, boost up to 2597 or whatever it is, but if we add 400 to that 400 or that 500 is getting added to the 2597, not to the base clock. So it's like auto boost clock and then offset on top of that. So that's why we were able to push the thing to over 3200 megahertz. In fact, over 3300 megahertz through part of the test, which is actually kind of nuts because we were not able to actually achieve that if we look at the frequencies for the prime BIOS. So the prime BIOS was not allowing us to be able to go as far frequency-wise. It's because it probably wasn't allowing as much power to be available to it. But the part that I can't really explain, and all of these are 4-run averages, is why we're able to get a higher clock speed at less power draw. If we go ahead and compare temperatures too, you can see with the stock BIOS, the pink line and the blue line, they're just kind of crossing each other. They almost look like a DNA strand, if you will. And we cap out at about 60 C on average. And you can see it was still sort of climbing during the test. The test isn't long enough for it to hit equilibrium on the vapor chamber. But the hottest part of the test is obviously right at the end. But if we take a look at the overclocked temperatures here, we hit almost 65 C by the end of the test, so almost 5 C higher with the overclocked prime BIOS. But if you look at the tough BIOS, it's the same as the stock numbers. So it's actually kind of impressive that with the tough BIOS, we were able to, on a basic no frills card in the same family, like the same brand of graphics cards, able to get more clock frequency and less power draw, which is really kind of crazy to me, because the one thing we have to look at now is what kind of performance uplift did we get? Well, in Steel Nomad, we went from an average 71.74 FPS to a 72.23 FPS. Now this is a 4K test. Jumping up a half an FPS or 1 FPS is actually a pretty big jump in this test, believe it or not. But when you overclock it, the prime stock BIOS at plus 400 core, plus 2000 mem, 77.6 FPS, with the tough overclocked 78.02 FPS, which tells me that realistically it's just that additional plus 100 core. If I was able to get the same plus 500 core on the stock prime BIOS, it probably would have given me the same numbers, but something about the tough BIOS is allowing it to get more voltage maybe at less power, which doesn't make any sense because voltage and watts and amps is the calculation of how you figure out power draw. I don't know why we are pulling less power and getting more frequency with the tough BIOS, but that is the way that the frequency charts worked out. So at the end of the day, what can we deduce? We can deduce that it's still, in my opinion, quite the scam to come out with these $250 premium 70 tier custom models or $1,300 to $1,500 custom 5090 models on top of the $2,000 MSRP. Look, if you're like me and you like to tinker, if you can get yourself an MSRP card and you can just throw a faster OC BIOS on it, like there's no reason not to do that. Because here's the thing, it doesn't even void your warranty technically, because as long as it's not broken, if you need to send it in for RMA, you can just flash the BIOS right back. It's not like a computer on a car where they have a flash counter to tell it, oh, this card was messed with and flashed. So I'm always gonna tinker with my stuff. And if you can get the same similar performance of a $250, or in this case, $180 more expensive card for the same, you don't have to pay the extra 180 bucks, you can get that performance. Why wouldn't you do it? So I just wanted to make this video to show you, I see everyone posting these pictures in these forums that I belong to, like, look, I'm doing my new build, and I'm seeing people buy like 5060 Ti, like the custom, I remember if it's a Strix or whatever, like Strix cards, or seeing these like Oris Master 5060 cards. I'm like, why are you spending the extra money on this crap? Like, you're just throwing money down the drain for no reason whatsoever. In fact, if you think about it, the 5070 Ti Tough is $999 at Micro Center. But and yes, you can get them at Best Buy, by the way, 5080 Founders Edition for $999. You kind of got to do some diligence and kind of keep updating the site, but people are still getting them. You can get 5080 Founders Edition cards at $999. In fact, if you live near a Micro Center, even Micro Center has Founders Edition cards. When we were there not that long ago, they told me they had an open box 5080 that somebody had bought and like returned within a couple of days, but because it was returned, they tested it, it worked 100% fine, nothing was weird, serial numbers matched, no tomfoolery happened. They had that card open box discounted to $800. That is insane to me.
It's cheaper than the Prime.
Yeah, it is, you're right. Yeah, it's $829. But anyway, okay, so moral of the story is just stop overspending on buying the super shiny RGB triple slotty big graphics cards and mid-tier products that you don't need to overspend on. Just MSRP or as close to those models as you can find. And yes, they do exist. Like, graphics card prices are being driven down right now because all these retailers and e-tailers stockpiled the crap out of them to get ahead of the tariffs, and then now the buying frenzy is over, so now they're sitting on stockpiles of graphics cards, and now there's all these rumors about NVIDIA is about to slash prices on these cards. No, NVIDIA's probably getting ready to slash prices because the super variants, as we know, are coming. Anyway, that's why they're getting ready to slash prices for real. With that said, let's just do a quick tutorial on how to flash the card so that you guys can also give the middle finger to brands and not overspend. All right, first things first, you're gonna look up NVIDIA, or NV Flash 64. Download. You should get a link to Tech PowerUp right at the start, 5.867. You're gonna download that utility. Okay, once you download that, you need to also make sure you have Tech PowerUp GPU-Z. This is also a bit of a crash course, so you might have to pause this as we go. You need to make sure you save your stock BIOS. So if you click this little square up here and say save to file, you need to say yes, it's gonna stop the driver. Then what it's gonna do is it's gonna allow us to go ahead and save the file. Once it pops back up here, there we go. So what it's gonna do is it's gonna disable the driver, it's gonna pull the VBIOS off of it, then re-enable the driver, then give you the save prompt. Now, it's called GB203 because that's the die. Just call it what your graphics card is. So in this instance, I already have one, and I called it 5070 Ti Prime. There it is right there. So that way I just know what it is, boom, it's saved. Before you do any custom modifications or BIOS flashing, you should do that. Now, download or go to your folder that you have your NV Flash. In my instance, it's just my 5090 overclocking folder here. I've got NV Flash and NV Flash 64. We want to use those. Make sure that your ROM file is also in the same folder as your NV Flash. Now, we can go ahead and open up a command prompt. You guys like to do the command to open it up right in its spot. I'm old school. I'm always going to do the change folder and clear my screen. Okay, anyway, so we can't do the method where we just take our custom file and drop it onto the NV Flash file because of the fact that even though they're both ASUS, they are different cards specifically. So the last numbers are not going to match. Because those don't match, or the second to the last numbers are not going to match, it's going to say it's a sub ID mismatch, and basically saying it's not the right card, and we'll have to override that. But we need to also get the BIOS we want to install. So we're going to go back to Tech PowerUp, and here is, for instance, you can go here to Databases VGA BIOS Collection, and this is where every BIOS, like people upload these BIOSes themselves. They'll rip the BIOS off the same way I just showed, and then they'll upload them. They'll tell you if it hasn't been vetted, like if they haven't checked that it's real. It could be tampered with. This is a do-at-your-own risk. I've never personally had one that was tampered with, but you could get a BIOS that could potentially bork your GPU. So this is definitely a do-at-your-own risk. But we're gonna go ahead and go to card model here, and we're just gonna find RTX, and sorry this text is really bad looking. This is just part of the tweaks I've done to this OS for extreme overclocking, but I digress. We're gonna find RTX 5070 Ti. Boom, they have 11 different VBIOS for them. You could potentially try other brands. Look, One Click OC, that's, I'm assuming, gonna be a custom one right there. I'm not entirely sure. But you can see right here, here's the Tough OC. That's got the 2588 BIOS, but two different sub-IDs, a .2E and a .2F, probably two different variants of the same card. But anyway, we can just go ahead and download the Asus Tough. You just click download, and then it's gonna be like Asus RTX 5070 Ti.16384. Blah, 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 blah. Just rename that something like 5070 Ti Tough or something easy. Put it in the same folder as your NV Flash, and we'll be good to go. Do NV Flash 64 space dash dash override sub space and then the file name. Now yes, this is exactly the same as the process I showed you guys when I did the 5090 gigabyte versus Asus BIOS, but that was where I was showing you how to take a supported custom BIOS thing and put it on a different brand. This is for you to actually get a benefit to the money that you've spent without having to actually spend the money, if that makes sense. So we're gonna go ahead and now do the BIOS, which I have on here, which is the 5070 Ti Tough.ROM. So 5070 Ti Tough.ROM. Boom. Say yes, because it's running as administrator. There we go. Reading the EEPROM. It says, are you sure that, it's basically saying there's a mismatch. Are you sure you want to override? Say yes. It's like you're gonna override the current version with this version. So you can see the only thing different on these is actually the last two numbers, a .31 versus a .2E. Again, two different graphics cards, and that's the reason why those, if we had another Tough or another Prime, it would flash just fine without having to do anything. So I'm gonna say yes. Okay, so now that that is done, it's disabled the driver, because right now, like if I open up MSI Afterburner, you'll see it'll just be all a bunch of zeros because of the fact that it disabled the driver. So now we need to restart the system. So now our boost clock says 2588, where before it said 2452 because that's what the stock Prime BIOS was. It's still just gonna say Asus. It doesn't show like what card it is and say Tough or Strix or any of that. It's just an Asus 5070 Ti. Also too, if you click the lookup button, it's just gonna bring you to what this BIOS version is saying it is. And then as you can see right now, our Prime, which is on the test bench right now, is identifying as a Tough, which it's not. And it also doesn't carry that price of a Tough either. But as you saw in the charts, it gave us the performance of the Tough. Oh, actually our max power limit is 330. So that's really interesting. The Tough BIOS has a lower power limit to us, which we saw in the charts. At least I know the charts were gathered correctly because we saw that 330 is about where it maxed out. Now the Prime BIOS says 350, but you saw in the overclock, I can only go plus 400 in the overclock because it kept crashing. Look, if we know anything about the XOC stuff, you can clearly change the BIOS on a 50 series card and have it just give you more power. So it's obvious that the Tough BIOS is giving us less. Well, let's do this real quick. Why don't that one's the .2E. Why don't I download another one real quick and see if the other one is different? Maybe it's a variant, a BIOS thing. So I actually just installed the other Tough variant. There's a 2E and a 2F. Both of them have the same 330 watt power limit. So that 10% additional power limit obviously means they're both still 300 watt base 100% power, which is what the spec of the 5070 Ti is from NVIDIA. But the 10% obviously is 30 watts, which gives us 330. And then 16% to 300 obviously is what's getting us to our 350. So I don't know why they're allowing more power limit on the Prime card, because the Tough BIOS is using less power and actually getting better performance, which you guys saw in our charts. So that's a weird one. I might have to do a further investigation into that out of my own curiosity. But anyway, the moral of the story is the same. Buy the cheaper card, download and install the better BIOS.